Hi, I'm Ben McKenzie from Ben Pastoral. We're located roughly 180 kilometres southeast of Cunnamulla in the Paru Shire, southwest Queensland. Yaralla's 60,000 acres, just a touch more, and we're about 15.5 inches average rainfall. The main enterprises we run here are beef, meat, sheep, and rangeland goats crossed with Boers and Kalaharis. My family purchased Yaralla 11 years ago. It was merinos, solely merinos, harvesting rangeland goats, and I've been here since I left uni.
Hi, I'm Andrea McKenzie. We met at uni. Ben was studying agribusiness. Needless to say, he didn't finish. But we joke that he still came out with a degree because he came out with me and my vet degree, so. I've been part of the business for nearly 10 years, basically since we started dating.
The country at Yaralla ranges from broken Brigalow, Gidgee country through to Coolabah watercourse country. The Kneebine Creek runs north-south through the place, floods approximately 15,000 acres. There's also sandhill country on the western side of the place. We've been running goats behind wire for approximately 20 years. My parents before me, and as we've sort of taken over part of the business, we've continued and probably gone a little bit harder than my parents did. Currently a continual join, we muster twice a year, weaning right down to about 8 weeks. We scan all our nannies both rounds, empty sold to meatworks. Fertility's one of the main factors in a goat. When we first took over from Mum and Dad approximately 3.5 years ago, we originally stocked with rangeland goats. We were in the middle of exclusion fencing Yaralla. We did some trapping jobs to the south of us. Our part of the deal was we got the underweights, and I wanted to join all our goats to Kalaharis. We couldn't find any big numbers of Kalaharis from one vendor. Purchased about 70 does, full blood does to start with, and then one of the producers that I purchased the most does off, I had a good yarn to him about genetics, and they were on a smaller place further south from us. We talked about doing an embryo program. They supplied the genetics, we supplied the country to grow them out on and the recips. We've done 2 embryo programs now, a week away from starting our 3rd. Still doing it in partnership with the original guys we started with, and we're now at approximately 450 purebred red does. The original reason we went into the Kalaharis and Boer goats was to add quick weight gain to our rangeland goats. I think as a line of goats, the reds sort of stand out and are quite eye-catching, and we find them better mothers than the standards. Our embryo program is all facilitated by Overtech, Francois and Lynn Moraes from Dubbo. They've done our last 2 and are doing this one. We pick our genetics, roughly just the best traits we can get out of our does. The does are then programmed so they are ovulated at a certain time. Embryos are then placed into recipient does that have been lined up the same as the donors. Probably the hardest thing in our country is the paddocks are quite large. Even the embryo paddocks are quite big and are quite hard to find progeny as they're born for tagging purposes. Just for data collection, obviously with registered goats, they're tagged at birth and weighed, and that way you don't have to do any DNA testing. You can get dams in size from birth. It's quite tricky in our country just purely on paddock size. Biggest advantage for us was multiplying our best genetics quickly, taking sort of big leaps forward in genetic gains quite quickly. We've been able to sort of multiply the best of our genetics really fast, which has been the major positive for us. In our stud, we push for commercial relevance. We run a large commercial operation as well. We join up to 4,000 nannies. Currently numbers are back, but we've found that if we can't make the bucks in our stud program work commercially for us, then there's not much point in selling them to someone else. The main breeding objectives for our stud are early maturing, high weight gain goats that we can turn off at an earlier age. Our commercial side of the business is still by far and away the most profitable side, not the stud, so we want it to work in our commercial operation as much as the people that want to buy our stock want it to work in their commercial operations. The best of our genetics are kept every year, culled on obvious faults. Structural integrity is a big thing in our part of the world, big distances to travel. The best of our genetics are kept close to home so we can single side join, all those sort of things. The majority of our genetics are taken to a commercial buck breeding group, which is group side joinings in quite large mobs, aimed at big producers looking to purchase big numbers. We originally went into meat sheep approximately 3 years ago. We purchased mixed age Dorper ewes from various sources. Over the course of an 18-month period on a trading program, we run approximately 2,500 ewes, and they're all joined to Aussie Whites now. The majority of our lambs are killed through TFI, Thomas Foods, in Tamworth. Bulk of our ewe lambs are sold to restockers, other than what we keep for ourselves as replacement ewes. Our castrate sheep are mostly sent to meatworks, either Fletcher's or to TFI as well. Over the past 3 years, we've learned a few lessons along the way. A big one for us is not running sheep and goats together. We find worm burdens can get quite large. The biggest issue, apart from worm burdens for us, is a management timing thing. We find it really hard to make the two musters line up where you're mustering both sheep and goats at the same time, and for handling purposes it makes it a lot more difficult to be doing two species at once. As we've progressed with our sheep, we'd like to step away from the Dorpers, focus more on the white genetics. We find the Aussie Whites are a good ewe base and are currently looking at using ultra white rams over first and second cross Australian white ewes. I have a passion for cattle. The majority of our cattle are Boss Indigus cross cattle. A lot of our trade cattle are Brahman cross cows coming from the north. Our homebred cattle are Droughtmaster, Santa, Charbray cross cows. We use Droughtmaster bulls predominantly, with Simmental bulls as a terminal sire. In average seasons at Yaralla, we run very few cattle, usually about 50 cows. The last couple of years we've been trading quite a lot of breeders, a lot of cattle from the north. Currently running 850 cows. A majority of those will go in the next 6 months. A lot of those cattle will be run in a breeder unit on a long-term adjustment place. The rest will just be phased out as a part of the trading program. We find our trading has been probably the most profitable part of our business over any of our breeding enterprises. The land improvements we're looking to do in the near future are aerial seeding of buffel grass, re-pulling country. The majority of our grazing country is saline based. We grow a lot of saltbush and gidgee-burr. As a rule at Yaralla, we try not to feed ad lib anything. We find that the transport cost of feeding stock in dry conditions outweighs the benefit. We'd prefer to sell early and save country and make hay while it's unshining. Good seasons, stock up, use the feed you've got available and destock early. Yaralla is watered by 4 artesian bores, all high-flowing bores, 3 of which are piped and capped, servicing about 70 kilometres of 50mm poly to poly tanks and cement troughs. Most of the place is accessible from about 1.8 kilometres from any furthest point to water in any paddock. There's still currently 1 bore drain left to be piped. The artesian water on Yaralla comes out of the ground at approximately 60 pounds and about 42 to 48 degrees, depending on which bore you're at. Since taking over from my parents, we've completely exclusion fenced Yaralla and completed 115 kilometres of internal 890/30 fence. We've got approximately 40 k's to go and 1 pipeline left. We've done a little bit of work to our house, 2 new sets of yards, 3rd to go in, and we have a new shed and a hay shed going in at the cattle yards. The main benefits we've had from exclusion fencing have been the ability to control grazing pressure, where we were running quite a lot of kangaroos pre-drought and exclusion fence. We're now at a controllable number, we're comfortable. They're not something we want to get rid of completely, but we didn't need to be running them in the numbers we were. Pest control at Yaralla now is quite simple. We bait for pigs and foxes, cats. There's no dogs left inside our fence, so our pest control is pretty straightforward these days. Accessibility is one of our major fallbacks, being so far from town. We have 90 k's of dirt. In the recent wet years, we've been upgrading our internal end of the road, carted approximately 1,000 tonne of gravel in to do up around our yard complex and our homestead complex. Along with the roads around the house, we've put in a flood crossing approximately 450 metres long to be able to access stock on the eastern side of the Kneebine Creek. We spent 6 months not being able to get stock from one side to the other.
So recently we upgraded our airstrip. It was long enough but not well enough maintained for the full length, so we've brought it up to spec with the RFDS requirements. Ben had an accident a couple of years ago. It was pretty serious at the time, but he came out of it luckily pretty scotch-free, but it really highlighted we're about 50 k's from the nearest serviceable airstrip, so especially with the little kids here. And Ben's accident was just riding along a fence line, nothing out of the ordinary, just a stick in the road, so it can happen anytime, so it's just great to have it there. So we developed an emergency protocol a couple of years ago. Basically it just runs through the location of the property, GPS points, directions to and from town. We've also got an RFDS medical chest here, so instructions on how to use that, neighbours and family to contact if someone needs help. And another key part of our workplace health and safety is satellite spot track devices, which basically send a text message to either my number or whatever numbers you want to put in there, and they can also send to an email address. When we first got those, Ben also thought that was a bit of a silly idea, but it was quite convenient timing. He got 2 flat tyres in the ute and was stranded for a while. He went to dozer fence line and told me to pick him up 4 hours later, and stalled the dozer early in the piece and couldn't get it started again, so sat there for 4 hours waiting for me to turn up. After that, he thought the spot track was a pretty good idea, even just for those routine things. And obviously if there had been anything that was an emergency, it will pay for itself in a heartbeat. So it takes a lot of stress out of my mind, wondering where he is and whether he's going to be home on time, just knowing that if he was in trouble, he'd be able to push that button and I'd know. So. Ben's role in the business is primarily on the operational day-to-day side. He does all the livestock husbandry decisions, grazing decisions, and he brings a lot of flexibility to our business in the fact that he's skilled in sheep, goats and cattle, so that gives our enterprise flexibility to choose which market is either the most robust or the most profitable at the time. And he puts a lot of time and effort into watching the markets, and trading is a big part of our business, which gives us the flexibility in droughts, and so that expertise in the trading world is really important, and he brings a lot in that space.
My wife Andrea's numerous roles include chief preg tester, the mother to our 2 boys, Oscar and Gus, and the bookkeeper. None of what I do would be possible without her. So the main vet work I do on farm is preg testing, and in the last couple of years, worm egg counts. We mainly use preg testing if we buy trade cattle, maybe station mated, and use it to segregate and either sell them again, or if we're uncontrolled mobs, we can preg test back to a controlled join period, as well as the obvious selecting out good reproduction. And the egg counts have been great. We don't tend to use a lot of chemical here, we don't have to in most years, so it's been very handy in these bigger years to know when we've got a problem. We can really target drenching, and it's such a simple test to give you a lot of information. To run Yaralla, we have at least one offsider. So before kids, that was sort of mostly me if I was here, or a station hand if I wasn't. And now we've got a worker who's basically half-half, so half nanny with the kids and half station hand. And then we use contractors anytime that we have a big muster. So big goat musters will have between 4 and 8 ground staff, as well as pilot, just for the peak periods. Our seasonal conditions are fairly varied. The last 2 years have been exceptional, in excess of sort of 30 inches for the last 2 years. Previous to that, yeah, we had a pretty tough run from when we first purchased in 2011. We had a pretty good year in 2012. Other than that, it's been pretty ordinary, sort of down to about just over 4 inches 1 year, which was the lowest on record for this part of the world. So we use goats as a main part of our enterprise. We find the ability to bounce back after a dry period out of small stock. Meat sheep are very similar. The ability to build numbers quite quickly. Yeah, so you can sort of destock to quite a low number and be back in business within 12 months, back to nearly fully stocked. It's why we've sort of hinged our business off the goat, and more recently into meat sheep as well. We find them quite similar. And
I also work at QDAF part-time, which is great for off-farm income, and it gives me a lot of opportunities to get outside perspectives, hear the latest research, meet lots of different consultants and producers, and get a lot of outside information into our business.
Our start in our farming lives, the opportunity was given to us by my parents, Jim and Trish McKenzie. They both grew up in family farming and both ended up at my father's country. Dad sold his original family farm and moved further west in the Cunnamulla district, and we expanded about 12 years ago. In the last sort of 5 years, we started discussing our succession planning. While I thought it was moving quite slowly, it was quite fast. We were very lucky, 2 very similar farms with only 2 siblings interested in coming home, so it was very straightforward. Everyone got along quite well. There was definitely trying times, there's no doubt in that. I suppose one of the big things for us moving forward is we'd like to have a lot more decisions made before the kids are old enough to have to think about them. I really love the farm life for the kids because it's so diverse. There's so much science in farming, there's so much physicality. There's just so many different places that they can go from an upbringing out here, aside from just having so much freedom and the world's biggest playground. The main reasons I get up in the morning, I suppose, are to take my kids to work. I quite enjoy watching my kids learn things, although they're still quite young and in the road a lot of the time. I think that starting to take them at a young age is a lot about imprinting, and you get to watch them learn new things every day. It's pretty cool. Currently the Cunnamulla district is full of young producers, similar age to myself. Without sort of realising it's quite a good network. Good place to be bouncing ideas off each other, whether it's just at a barbecue or a sporting function. Especially through the drought, it really didn't feel like we were alone at any point. Everyone was in the same situation and everyone really looked out for each other. And in these places, if you want an opportunity, if you want something to do, you basically have to do it yourself. And everyone really does, and it's really nice to be in a place where everyone is putting in for the community and making it the place that it is. I was fortunate enough to get involved with a photography project called the Bush Project for a coffee table book, and as part of it he was interviewing some of his subjects, and we ran out of time to do the interview and I wrote an article. It was towards the end of the drought. I really didn't like how we'd been portrayed as farmers, as battlers through the drought. I just thought it undersold the skills of farmers and the planning and the structure of their enterprises that went into managing drought. Sure, it sometimes becomes a fight, but a lot of it is skill. And that article went into Grazier and into, I think it was the Sydney Morning Herald. So it was really good to have that opportunity to promote agriculture for the complexity and technicality that's involved in it. Going into the future, I'm hoping to take on a bigger role with the stud. I obviously like the record side of things a lot more than Ben, but with the kids and my off-farm work, there hasn't been a lot of time for it. So hoping that I can take on a bigger role there, and that frees Ben up a lot as well because it is quite intensive. So he can get on with the bigger stuff and the trading that he's really into. In the future, our main goals short term is to finish our capital improvements, finishing our fencing program and seeding, repulling country and some slight upgrades to cattle yards. So there's a new crush to go in and shade over the crush and calf cradle area. Long-term goals, we'd like to expand into more country, and our end goal is to create an environment for our children to grow up with the same opportunities that our parents gave us. the opportunity to step into country, which is quite difficult to do if you're doing it by yourself. So